Picasso said, inspiration exists, but it has to find you working.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
Diana Oakley, Executive Director of the National Institute of Retirement Security, said, "We have a lot of individuals who have nothing saved for retirement, about 40% of the workforce." According to John Scott, Director of the Retirement Savings Project at Pew, there is no shortage of solutions out there. When employers offer retirement plans like 401ks or 403bs that automatically enroll employees rather than ask them to opt in, it dramatically increases the chance that people will at least start to save. This type of thinking, my friends, is why we have what's called a retirement crisis looming for baby boomers. It's all based on the premise that, number one, nobody's saving. Number two, the issue is we got to make people save more. Now, I don't deny that savings and investing is a critical part of being a good steward and taking care of your financial future. But when the median income in the United States for a household is around $52,000, it's like squeezing water from a rock. It's a little hard to save when you're trying to raise a family and live a life in America. It's just hard to save. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it can't be all of the solution. So in today's episode and in next week's episode, we're going to talk to a couple individuals that are helping us think about the later half in life a lot differently than what your financial planner might be painting for you. So let's get going on this topic here after the disclaimer. Boom, boom, boom. Time for that all-important disclaimer. Hey, don't take advice from me on the show. I don't know anything about you. I only give advice to clients I work with as a fiduciary, so I know enough about them to give them advice. So think of this as helpful hints and education. And before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor, because that just makes common sense. Now, let's get on to the show. A hot topic in financial planning is this retirement crisis, which we've talked about on many episodes, and how you need to break the paradigm of saving and investing being your only solution. The fact is that that type of thinking worked for your parents when retirement was a hard date. They worked and scrimped and had a pension and had Social Security, and then when they retired, they were literally worn out from work, and they weren't doing much in retirement. Their lifespan in retirement was going to be 10 to 12 years, and during that time, they were going to be on the park bench of life. You, on the other hand, if you're a typical baby boomer, you may have 20, 30, maybe 40 years in retirement. That's a long time. And at least the people I talk to, people like you, they're not looking at retirement as their chance to sit on the park bench of life. They're looking at retirement as the chance to live the life they want on their own terms, to pursue the things that they want to pursue. Well, you put in those two big differences, living longer and living more active, yeah. If it's only about savings and investing, we will have a retirement crisis, which means we need a new paradigm to think about how do we create a life where we can gain some freedom and still feel financially secure. So I say retirement is not a hard date like it is or was for your parents or grandparents. Retirement is a relationship that you figure out how to ease into. It's a way that you think about, how do I leave a full-time job that I either hate or that is demanding too much from me for a part-time or a full-time job that you actually love that supports living a life of more freedom from a time perspective? How do you gain more freedom sooner is really what the question is, not how do I save enough to get to that quote-unquote date. And this blows up the whole idea of what's my number, which is probably it is a very old way of thinking, and probably one of the worst ways to think about how do you create the life that you want, especially in retirement. Now, for many people, working during retirement is just going to be a requirement. That is primarily the solution for the retirement crisis. Since we're going to be living longer and spending more money, you're just going to need to be working longer if you weren't blessed to be able to save massive sums of money through whatever means. Doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just is how the world works now because of longevity and what we'll be doing in retirement. If that's the case, then you better start noodling on as quick as you can. How do I ease into getting more time freedom? And how do I pivot from this job or this career that is demanding too much from me to something that fits what I care about most and what really gets me excited to wake up for? We need to make sure we focus on that. Now, if you were blessed to be able to save up millions of dollars and be able to retire at a date and live on your savings, which is an awesome thing to do, that doesn't mean that work in some capacity isn't going to be part of the equation. And it might have nothing to do with money. It might have to do with purpose. It might have to do with socialization and building that network of friends. It might have to do with intellectual stimulation, physical stimulation, all those types of things that studies say make up a great life. You can get from work. The key is you can do it on your own terms as much as you want and doing the things that you actually enjoy. And I see that all the time in my practice with clients, that they are working but on their own terms and they're just in hog heaven. Or if you are blessed to save up enough and don't need to work, maybe you work for those big extras, those aspirations. One big aspiration for those that have accumulated a lot of money during retirement is spending a lot on a huge family vacation every year or every other year where they pay for everybody, the kids, the grandkids from all over the country, to go experience something together so they can create memories. That might be a great reason to do some part-time work or consulting just to achieve these aspirational things like that. So this is a real hot topic because whether you have not been able to save money because you're building a life and it's hard, or you've saved a lot of money, but you never really feel secure, work on your own terms, doing something you love can be a huge answer, not just to the financial equation of it, but also to the happiness equation of living a great life and giving back to the community and doing things for others. So this is an important topic. So what we're going to do in our practical planning segment today is we're going to have a conversation with Marc Miller. That's Mark with a C, he always reminds me. Marc is the author of Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life. He is currently a coach helping people identify what their true passions are and mapping out a pivot towards doing something that they get a lot more joy out of. Now, Marc, I laugh at Marc. He's a great guy. He's a crusty old IBMer. He tells it like it is. So he is who we're going to talk to this week, and then next week we'll have someone else with a little bit different perspective. So let's get to a conversation with Marc so you can start noodling on how do you leave what you've fallen into as a career maybe to start doing something that you love in order to solve this retirement crisis equation. So Marc, I'm going to start off with a question that I've been really noodling on lately. People talk about this retirement crisis, and in my mind, retirement is more about working on your own terms. And you actually end up being happier and more engaged in life if you have some type of work. The key is having that freedom, and I think that sort of slides into the book that you have coming out, Repurpose Your Career. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's rather interesting. I watched my father get forced into retirement at the age of 59. He was an economist for the New York Stock Exchange, and he had plenty of money. Finances was not a worry. It killed him. It took 15 years, but he was miserable. And my goal is to never retire. I want to work less at something I enjoy.
And I think that's the key, isn't it? It's you want to work, but on your own terms, so you have the time freedom, but also have something that you actually enjoy, because we sort of fall into our normal careers a lot of times.
Oh, you would be surprised the number of clients I've had who have gotten into careers early because someone told them, well, you know what? You're good at that. You should go do that. Or two, did exactly what their parents told them to do.
Yeah,
I can't tell you the number of lawyers I have met who are lawyers because their parents told them to.
The first part of that too, because I have found that there are things that I can be really good at that I don't really enjoy.
Well, it's rather interesting. I have one of my most popular posts that's found on my website. It's found 50 to 100 times today is talents versus skills. Do you know the difference? And of course, a talent is something you innately do. A skill is something you learn to do. And the challenge is we learn a lot of skills that are not tied to our innate talents. And the reality is, if you overuse a skill that's not tied to your innate talent, that's when burnout occurs.
There's not a congruence between that innate talent and what you do every day.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it bluntly, I'm a closet introvert. I mean, I'm a phenomenally good public speaker. I did that for IBM for 10 years. That's all I did. I'm sorry. When I now walk off a stage, I'm exhausted. If I went off there and became a full-time public speaker, which I've had friends suggest I go do, I would blow up. I'd run myself into the ground.
So when I look at, like with baby boomers, who sort of fell into more than most, when you graduate, now it's time to grow up, get a job, and then you buy the big house, and then you have the kids, and you almost build this cage that forces you to be in the career so you can generate the income to support the life you've created. And then retirement is, the phrase I hear is, it's finally my chance to live my life on my own terms and pursue what I enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I joke, I was raised to be an employee, to go work for a father-like company that would take care of me. And of course, 3/4 of the way through, they moved my cheese. But yeah, work wasn't supposed to be fun. Work was supposed to pay the mortgage, put our kids through college, put food on the table. It wasn't supposed to be fun. What do we do with our kids? We told them to follow the passion. The money will follow, which didn't work either.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's some interesting things there, but I want to focus on the baby boomers, your generation. So here I'm in my mid-50s, maybe I'm 60. I have this career that I was trained for. I want to retire, but retirement crisis, the numbers don't work for almost everybody. How do I get some of that working on my own or living on my own terms, but still doing it from a financial perspective? How do I do that pivot? How do I repurpose these skills that I've had to use, like you?
Well, the first thing you have to do is know thyself. And put it bluntly, most of us, as we entered the corporate world, we modified our behaviors to fit how our employers wanted us to behave. My classic example of myself being a closet introvert. I got paid more to be an extrovert. So you know what? I did that. And there are lots of different ways. I happen to work with my clients. I use a Berkman assessment, and I'll pick your personality apart, and we will figure out where you've morphed yourself. And I also have this concept of moments of clarity. Mm-hmm. We look at life through filters. Those filters protect us. But there are times in life where those filters come down. They are tragedies. They are wonderful events like marriages and births. They're bad things like layoffs and divorces, or in my case, 15 years ago, I had a near fatal bicycle accident and I hit a car head on at 50 miles an hour. And I lived.
were riding 50 miles an hour on your bicycle?
I was coming down a bicycle. I came down a hill at about 30 miles an hour and turned into a blind turn.
Ugh.
And I hit a Toyota Corolla going the other direction, going about 25, 30 miles an hour. Yes, I joked the fact that I spent 5 days in a trauma center. I broke a knee. I broke a hip, dislocated a shoulder, tore up my knee, broke a bunch of ribs, broke the clavicle. I had imprints of the pads in the helmet in my head. But I had no internal injuries and no brain injuries I'm willing to admit to.
Yeah, that we know of.
Oh, and by the way, I was back on a bike. They had walking on crutches in 3 days. I was back on a bike in 10 weeks, flying back to China in 4 months. Oh, I flew right smack into the middle of the SARS epidemic, the bird flu epidemic.
But
it's what I refer to as my WTF moment.
But that moment gave you that moment of clarity that you mentioned.
Sure. You suddenly go, oh my gosh, why am I doing what I'm doing?
And that's interesting because it is. We sort of walk around in our roles and there's these, I call them pressure points. So just the same thing, but different term of these pressure points that sort of wake you up and allow you to think about creatively or intentionally about, okay, where am I at? What am I doing? And why am I doing it? Because most of the time we're too busy to do that.
Another moment of clarity for me was I was working for IBM. I ruptured the L4, L5 disc during Christmas of 1992, and I decided to take 3 months off on disability and let it heal. When I walked back into work in early April, and by the way, that was during the time that IBM nearly went bankrupt. And I walked back in and chaos had broken out. And it was like, wow, I had such clarity that I went and said, I don't want to deal with this. And I made a whole bunch of changes because I was clear.
How does someone do that now when and I imagine a lot of times it's either they got laid off or they want to retire, or not retire, but they want to get out of their career, but they have no clue what the bridge is.
Yeah, that's where I came up originally with the term pivot, because it's not like going from, I want to be a cabinet maker tomorrow. No, you're going to make multiple steps to get there. But the first question comes down to is, what skills do you want to continue to use? And by the way, what skills do you want to leave behind? And the key piece here is to get out of your head. I've worked with any number of clients who said, yeah, I've been working on this for 3 years and all I keep on doing is thinking about it and never getting anywhere. And that's where I don't care whether it's hiring a coach like me, working with your spouse, working with a friend, get someone that you start talking to on a regular basis. You know, it could be a men's group at your church, something to get you out of your own head.
And so what's the first step in that, do you think?
Well, first step is the self-awareness.
Okay, I have an itch I have to figure out how to scratch.
Yes. And one of the things that I do with my clientele is I use my assessments, but I will take and poke you and take you back to the best of times. When have you been the happiest in your career? And when have you been the most miserable? And why? Because a lot of times I claim I've left high tech twice. And I quote, the second time I went back to tech, I relapsed. I went back into a second startup. It's kind of like the woman who has an abusive husband and she leaves him, divorces him, and then she just goes marry someone the same guy again.
Right.
Because it's familiar. And one of the things is to get back and look at your patterns and understand, I don't want to do that again. I'll use an example of myself. My first job out of IBM, and when I joined IBM in the late 70s, is I sat in an office and was writing word processor software. And I sat with a coding pad 8 hours a day. Barf.
Now, most people, when this subject comes up, they have very little idea of what else they could do.
Well, this is very similar to the problem you had when you were 18. When you were 18, you didn't know what you didn't know. But you were also, particularly as an 18-year-old guy, you were pretty stupid because 18-year-old guys are stupid. But it's going out and exploring. It's no different than, your son is now off in college and he's off exploring. Somewhat you have to do the same thing and go try stuff.
In a very agile way. You don't just, I found my passion, I'm jumping in, and then you leave your career and then you go bankrupt.
Well,
it's an iterative process of testing.
Yeah, very likely what you're going to do, which is what is promoted for the millennials, is go sidestep. Go start a side business.
So talk about that a little bit. What is it to
Sure.
sidestep if you're a baby boomer in a career?
Okay. Like right now, I've been working with a gentleman who teaches at one of the major universities. He's not a professor, he's an instructor. And one of the things I've sent him off to do, he's very mission driven. As I said, you need to find a problem to solve.
Because that's naturally what we all do in the marketplace is
yes.
We solve problems for a company, for a customer, for whoever.
Yeah. And so one of the things he's off looking at is, can he solve the problem of the gentleman's a accomplished musician, can he solve the problem of the fact that kids are not going into classical music anymore? Orchestra, band, that is declining the interest in that in schools. So what can he do about that? It's something he's actually kind of really interested in, and do it on the side.
So it's almost creating what is a hobby? A hobby is something you do on the side because you love it, right?
Yes.
This has a good parallel to that, except that it has a potential commerce aspect of it.
Correct.
A hobby that pays.
Yes. And so one of the things that a lot of people are promoting is, a lot of us know a lot of stuff. So can we go off and start a consulting business on the side? Can I build an online business where either I consult or I teach? Maybe I start developing online courses, which is, by the way, is a huge market, and be able to kind of step out of that a little bit at a time. By the way, when I launched Career Pivot, I'd been working on it on the side for about 2 years. And I was doing a little career coaching on the side. And if I hadn't been put in a highly unethical position by my boss, I would have waited another year before I launched it. But I launched it in 2011 because I was ready. And so the idea here is, do this on the side and go explore. The first thing you do may not be what you end up wanting to do. But by the way, it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur.
Well, and the key thing is you start it while you're in your current career, so you have the freedom and the lack of pressure to really experiment without the chips being all on the line.
Yeah. And the fact is, it used to be, I got to put up a website. Oh, that's going to cost me thousands of dollars. Now you can do it for about $50.
So let me ask you a question, because you work with a lot of people that are noodling through all these issues and they have that clarity moment, right?
That's right.
Are they attempting to pivot to another full-time career, or are they looking for the bridge between the quote unquote a traditional retirement and gaining more time freedom? What is it that you think motivates them the most?
I think most of my clientele are just simply trying to stay employed. I have very few clients who are actually saying, wow, I want to go retire. Most of them want to keep working and trying to figure out, how do I stay in the game? In fact, one of the interviews I'm going to be doing for my next month on my podcast is a gentleman who, believe it or not, had been in sales. He'd been in B2B sales, industrial sales, had watched that just completely collapse. Believe it or not, what he ended up doing was he ended up training as a train driver on the Houston Metro line. He ended up being a trainer for them as they launched the Red Line. Did that for 2 years. He kind of got burned out on it. He is now, believe it or not, he's a drone pilot back here in Austin. He's working for a company here that's doing autonomous drones, so he's doing testing for them. He's teaching people how to do drones, how to be drone pilots, and the last thing, he's shooting video for realtors. And by the way, he's having a blast.
Well, and I think that's the other key aspect. And personally, I think, this idea of a retirement crisis is because if it's all about saving and investing, of course, the math just doesn't work. We're going to live too long and we're going to spend too much money. But retirement isn't a date. It's really a relationship where you slowly slide into doing work that you enjoy more rather than the corporate grind. And that also gives you some time freedom. And it sounds like this guy has sort of achieved that. He's doing something he enjoys, which extends his work life, but also it increases his enjoyment and fulfillment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we were going through his assessments, and his comment to me was, as a kid, if it had, let's say if I can get this right, wings, wheels, or keels, it was cool. And as a young man, he got an associate's degree in aviation. He thought, maybe he'd go back and be a school teacher, and the easiest way to get a bachelor's degree was in aviation. He's a pilot. And when we kind of got talking about, being a train driver, he went down to Houston to interview, and they put him through some real interesting interview, but they wanted him to walk out on the rail yard where there's all the heavy gravel. And he says when he finally walked out and he jumped in the train for the first time, he immediately went to himself, I'm going to get to drive a train.
And you end up building a whole new network of friends that share the same interests and the places it goes outside of just the work.
And he didn't make a lot of money at it. He was probably making $50,000 a year. The downside was he was living in a trade. He took his RV down to Houston. His wife is still working up here in Austin. And after 2 years, he just got tired. He says, he wanted to come home. It's going out and exploring that kind of stuff. He had completely forgotten about a lot of what he wanted to do as a kid, which, by the way, most of us do.
What was it that you wanted to do as a kid?
It's interesting. One of the ways I look back on looking at talents is going back at what did you do as a kid that you couldn't get enough of? And by the way, when I was a kid, I loved jigsaw puzzles.
Okay.
I love putting stuff together.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. The purpose of this book, is it to help create the framework to walk through?
Yeah. The idea is to start trying to diagnose yourself. So as I go through, I go through the process of, number one, how to go rediscover things. What are the pitfalls that we go through as we've gone through our career? So I've got a whole chapter on recovering from career failures, which, by the way, I've done 3 times. And part of one of the key pieces is a lot of us don't try stuff because we're scared of failing. I grew up in the generation where failure was not an option. Mm-hmm. Well, we live in the world of where, the kids go out to Silicon Valley and they say, fail often, fail fast.
Failure is now part of the process.
Yes. And so be willing to go do things. I've got a whole chapter on what I call MSU syndrome. Make stuff up. And by the way, you can replace stuff with another appropriate word. And
thank you for not doing that, by the way.
Yes. And part of it is when we look at something and we don't know something, we naturally fill the void with what we make up in our heads. I'll use the classic example. I went off to teach high school math about 15 years ago, and I just assumed I was a teacher. I mean, I was a trainer in high tech. I built curriculum. I taught in 40 different countries. I was an engineer. There's a shortage of math teachers. Of course they'd want me. No, they didn't. I was an over 40-year-old guy, and they didn't want me. We don't do what we're told. I made that up.
Mm-hmm. You made all the assumptions.
Yes. And the idea is to learn to stop doing that, but also paying attention to when you do. Because, by the way, we create a lot of stress for ourselves when we make stuff up.
That's where almost all the stress comes from.
Right. I mean, well, if I buy this now, it's going to lose value. Well, how do you know that? Oh, if I ask somebody for a job, they're going to say no. And how do you know that?
So I'm excited to read this book because I have not read it yet. And because it just became available for pre-order. So when is it going to be in my hot hands?
The goal is to have it out on April 15th. in celebration of tax day.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to find this is actually a second edition. This is an expanded version of my original book, which was Repurpose Your Career: Practical Guide for Baby Boomers. And I'm kind of extending it down some to what I now refer to as the second half of life, which is something you're probably going through right now with your kids getting out of the house.
And I feel like for the most part, I've gone through this intuitively, and I'm right in my sweet spot, which is, I tell you, the people that I've met and the engagement that I have, I've never felt this alive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I claim we go to the first half of life and we fill all these commitments and we have all these obligations. And then sometime, and it's different for all of us, we do a shift in our own minds, our values. Suddenly, whether it's the kids going off to college. I remember, we've discussed this when my son went off to college, because we only have one, my social life died.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was wrapped around his band, soccer, everything. And it was suddenly like, wow. Second was when I paid off the mortgage. Wow. Suddenly I'm not paying this chunk of change out every month.
I think one reason I'm excited to get the second edition is obviously you've lived through this, but what I end up valuing most counsel from people, not just people that have lived through it, but I love that you actually have these conversations with clients every day, because I know the value of that perspective of seeing different versions of a lot of the same themes, which really creates a lot of wisdom. So I'm excited to read the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a couple of clients said they came to me because I've made every career mistake you can make. Because I'm on my 7th career, so I've screwed up multiple times. I've had 3 major career failures, and where I went off and did something new and it completely blew up on me. And I recovered each time.
So what we're going to have to do is when the book comes out and it's out for a little bit, we're going to have you back on. So after I dive into it, we can really get into some of the meat of it more, because I think this is crucial, not just for the money part of it, but for creating and thriving in that second half of life.
This is all about knowing yourself. In many ways, it's rediscovering yourself.
Great. Marc, thanks so much. I will put a link to the Amazon pre-order. Remind us the name of the book so people can Google it.
Sure. It's Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life.
On your marks, get set.
Hey, welcome to the Smart Sprint segment, where we set a 7-day goal to take a little tiny step to creating an awesome life. So in the next 7 days, here's what I want you to do. I want you to start noodling on what you're really passionate about. Maybe you journal about what you love about your job and what you don't like about your job. Maybe you noodle on what your hobbies are and where you really feel like you're energized. It doesn't mean you have to do anything with this in the next 7 days, but I want you to start thinking in terms of what really gets you excited. Because what this will do is this will start in motion maybe a second career. It may just start in motion something you do in retirement, even if you don't get paid, but it'll start helping you realize where your natural sweet spot is so you can start working towards that. Welcome to the Happy Lab, where we, noodle on how to be a little bit happier. So last week, Nicole Rockstar Mills, my awesome teammate, and I had our first monthly RAM World Domination Summit. So this is a monthly meeting where we go off-site and we sit there for a couple hours and we pick some high-value but not urgent projects to complete in 30 days to move the business forward so we can help people like you plan for and live out an amazing retirement. So we're doing this monthly. And while we were talking, we're brainstorming all over the place, she stops me and she goes, "Why do you do that? Why do you put yourself down or diminish your abilities?" And I didn't really think about it. And I didn't think I really did it. And then she told me what it was. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And I'll tell you what, I've had some business coaches tell me that, and I sort of downplay things. And what my business coaches have told me, and Nicole I'm very thankful that she pointed it out, was I'm not my biggest cheerleader. I tend to downplay things that I accomplish or my abilities, and I tend to sort of poo-poo myself. And really, what I need to be is my biggest cheerleader. I need to be my biggest cheerleader. And I think for you, wherever you're at in your retirement journey, whatever your assets are, whatever screw-ups you've had in your past, you need to be your biggest cheerleader, because that's the only way that you're going to move forward in having the impact in the world that you're supposed to have, and you're going to be happier for it. So thank you, Nicole. And this is my reminder to you, be your biggest cheerleader. Are you working with an advisor that has helped you accumulate assets over the decades, but now you're realizing, man, I'm thinking about this retirement journey and it's much more about investment management. I need a roadmap. I need a plan. I need somebody to work with that is helping me not just with the assets and managing the assets, but helping me with my entire financial picture and map out a successful transition to retirement. If you're looking for that and you don't feel like you're getting it right now, I work with clients across the country, build a roadmap, and make lots of little smart decisions to work towards the life that they actually care about. So if you're interested in an advisor that does that, I'm accepting clients currently. You can go to rogerwhitney.com, click on contact, send me a quick email, and we can have a good 15-minute chat. So until next week, this is Roger Whitney, the Retirement Answer Man.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.